gaps between kind of the modern mindset or the zeitgeist, what people think, and what's verifiable by science. And I think that they could explain it, and I think that they chose to explain it in poetic terms. The history looks a lot more like a movie, like a sci-fi movie. Humans are pretty easy to hack into. When stuff like this starts getting out broad, like, that's the end of the world.
Hi, Greg, for the third iteration of this. I hope you're enjoying as much as I do enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I have a secret wish in the back of my head that we don't get to finish it today.
So we this is our third time.
Exactly.
We might as well go for a half dozen, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I think as well. Greg, I think for the context, we don't actually need the formal introduction that we did before. But I would just say that it's Gregory Ditzia, the co-founder of the Cosmos University. And I think what we talked last time a bit was what was the moment in which you said, I think there is a big gap here, and I want to fill in that gap. Is there something that you can pinpoint in your memory? Like you said, it was a moment, or it was a sum of things that sum up?
Well, I've always been interested in the past and historical stuff, especially archaeology, and especially things that are sort of alternative archaeology. So that's been around forever in my mind. But we didn't start the company forever ago. And when we started it, it had absolutely nothing to do with archaeology. It was more just looking at, I guess, I would almost say like modern technologies gap between what would be considered. I mean, there's a lot of ground to cover here. I'm looking at my partner. There's a lot of ground to cover when we talk about the gaps between kind of the modern mindset or the zeitgeist, what people think, and what's verifiable by science. And it started kind of looking at like ESP and things like I don't know. I wear a bunch of rings, and all of these stones have like legends associated with them, and all of the metals have legends associated with them. Like silver is a feminine metal that represents the moon, and you're like, what does that even mean? Where does that first of all, where does that come from? And like, what does it mean? Because I mean, metal does do stuff. Metal, the metal's a bit more exciting than a pile of dirt, and it's more exciting than clay, and more exciting than even like wood from a physical perspective, physics perspective. But yeah, it's kind of like we looked at those things, and it was more coming out of it from the spiritual community. And I don't know if you're immune to it or your audience is immune to this, but there's been like a bombardment with social media of people just going out there and saying things. Like they'll just post an image, and it'll be like, you've got gold and it means this, and silver means this, and ruby means this, and if you need to block a psychic attack, use Tektite, and if you need to amplify your psychic abilities, rose quartz. And then so we went off trying to, where does that come from? Is there any quantitative basis for it? Because belief is really powerful at the end of the day, but people do claim to have these effects. That's why they post this stuff. That's why they agree with it. And, it goes further into plants and all these kind of things too. So it's really this large gap of like somebody at a spiritual store telling you, you got a problem with your job, go grab this thing and it should work, and being like, well, how is that a prescription that makes sense? Yeah. And I think what we found was that really the modern day is disconnected from the source information by all of like 100 to 200 years. So if you were to go back, to the 1700s, there was more of a understanding that every object held some sort of unidentified magical property, something that couldn't be measured yet, something that, like, they didn't have a device that could even break out chemicals inside of plants. You know, they couldn't see the substructure of the crystals, and metals. Um, so I found it to be kind of interesting, and so the further back you go, the more you have like definitive, this is what this does information. Um, like I wear a ring right here. This is gonna be. I'm sorry if your audience listens over audio, but if they look over video, this ring I wear, it's silver with brass and with a honk of an emerald on it, and it's designed based on the Solomon's ring. Like, so Solomon wore this pretty much exact ring, and from like from a physical perspective, silver, um, brass, and emerald, and he believed that that combination of things was enough to mess with the divine, to mess with the ether, to make it so that if an entity was like sitting across from you, like Solomon's whole claim to fame is that there's, he kind of like wrestled in demons and fallen angels and like said, tell me stuff. Like he put a bind on them and said, tell me the secrets. And so this was the ring that he thought helped him do it. So when you look into it, you go, well, what in the world basis does that have? Again, like, where's the scientific basis? There's this big gap. Well, silver is it will pull whatever bioenergy you have and do something with it. It's conductive. It's electrically conductive. Your body makes electricity. So a ring is
Okay.
something that could be powered by your own field. And beyond that, the emerald and the brass, well, the brass and the silver combination creates a difference. And when we talk about trying to move current, move electricity, you need a difference.
Correct.
Like a battery has two types of
The
metal.
potential
Yep,
difference. Yeah.
yep, yep.
The
You need
potential
it.
difference.
So you've got two things working towards you now. You've got conductive metals with a potential difference, then you've got a stone, an emerald. And the emerald itself, it's got a crystalline structure. And that crystalline structure can sometimes exhibit something called a piezoelectric property. And that piezoelectric property can convert sound or electromagnetic waves to electricity. And it can do it in the reverse. So if you add electricity to a piezoelectric crystal, it will create electromagnetic waves. And if you have no electricity, it goes the opposite way. So it can go both ways. So if you're wearing a ring and your body's creating electricity, then you're essentially broadcasting. You've got a signal coming off of you.
Oh, that's interesting. And you think
Right.
they knew it on a level back
Yeah.
then, but they couldn't
Yeah.
explain it?
No, I think that they could explain it, and I think that they chose to explain it in poetic terms. Because I could tell you exactly why the piezoelectric property takes place. Like we can go into that if we wanted to. We could pull out, right? There's no point, right? We
Mm.
could pull out and talk about crystalline substructures and lattices and things that you can see with your eye. We could talk about chemical compositions which lead to that effect taking place, or we could just say that's a magic stone, and you know,
Correct. That
like,
makes sense.
right, right.
Makes
So
sense.
I think we that's what we looked at originally, was just this pile of stuff that people tell you works,
Mhm.
and trying to like believe them for a minute and say, well, I believe you. Like I definitely believe you on the magical plant side. Um, but why would it be that stones have that too, and they're precious things, and trying to unwrap that was kind of like Cosmos's first. That was our first challenge. So that's what we launched with. We launched with like a big data bank with over 1,000 items in it. We have most crystals, metals. We have most plants, and we didn't try to go much beyond going into books on folklore magic and other books to kind of say like what is the consensus right now on these things, like how many of these sources say that a ruby is a fire element, or does a certain
Mhm.
magical thing, and sometimes you get connections, you get like different sources saying, yeah, no, this is where we everybody agrees the ruby is like this.
You
So
know,
going way back in time, even like way back.
It's interesting. So you started basically to study the, let's say, the things which are explained as magical, but you try to study the scientific base behind it. It's funny that you say this, but I actually had a discussion with someone yesterday regarding, because I'm at the moment in Romania, and I'm originally from Transylvania. Most probably you heard about Dracula, like everyone, which the Hollywood industry got it out from Transylvania and moved it to the US. But one of the things that is in the folklore here is that when you have garlic with you, you are rejecting the vampires. And I always ask myself, how do you come to this conclusion? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Isn't that that's kind of the thing is and that's get you're on the right um
exactly.
you're on the right mindset. This is the exact mindset of like, well, why do we have that? And you wonder like with stuff like garlic because you go, well, there's a lot of stuff, weird stuff in garlic. It's it's got a lot of weird properties and it has a lot of weird what are they called? Whatever that part of a food is, that's like the subparts, the
Hmm.
composition of it at the bottom, or the chemicals that kind of get derived out of garlic. And you wonder, is there anything in there that's like highly toxic to some things? I mean, honestly, garlic is pretty toxic to us. It's
Exactly.
not, yeah, it's not something you can eat in a big ass quantity and expect to not end into the hospital.
And
Like
it's hard to eat it in a raw form as well. So I think the toxicity of garlic should be clear for everyone now.
it might be that for something that's a, I don't know, it's a vampire or whatever. Like, maybe it's for something that has like like some unique set of genes. It's like the worst thing. It's like
Correct.
chocolate and dogs.
Correct.
Yeah, but,
Correct.
but that's the kind of stuff. Yeah, Paul. That's the kind of stuff that got us really interested in it, and we've been trying to figure out exactly how to go beyond our initial research there, but we got kind of distracted into publishing. I guess like publishing was more fun, but we actually went out and acquired a bunch of gear to start validating some of this stuff because we have an AC voltage generator and like or I'm sorry DC voltage AC to DC voltage generator that we can dial really specific voltages on. We have an oscilloscope, to see what is coming off of a thing, like what signals come off of a thing. We've got a bunch of handheld tools to see biofield, and that stuff is like mind blowing because it's really there. And a lot of people will say, well, it's not there. You like pull a device out and you're like, well, do you tell me why it is that, when I wave this around a human being, I see the numbers go way up and it's not measuring temperature. It's
Hmm.
measuring, in the gigahertz range, megahertz range, radio stuff. Um, so I think we're still trying to get back to that stuff to figure out if there is a big need for it. But as we went through it, we did these thousands of items. Probably, I think our total data bank count is over 100,000 kind of data points lined up
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
Um, my research partner, she went out and started going like, what research has been done that would even be around these things? And we found not much. Like really way less than you'd think. There's a couple of universities here in the States that set up like paranormal research labs, I guess you'd call them. But
And
almost like,
this sounds so bad, man.
what's that?
Because the thing that you call them paranormal research lab, I mean, I can understand the logic behind it, but just calling them paranormal, you just make them sound like a hoax. Like you don't make them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a chicken egg problem. I think that paranormal is the right way to say that stuff.
Oh,
And then
that's
over
interesting.
time, like it gets associated incorrectly in a sense. Like it gets associated with people grabbing onto that word and saying, look, because this word exists, like my personal crazy beliefs are paranormal beliefs and now they're true. So I think you get, does that make
I
sense?
know what you mean. Yeah, I know what you
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
So you think actually they misused the word, but the word actually makes sense in this combination of word.
It's the right word, paranormal, beyond the normal. Yeah, like the
Mm-hmm.
Latin resolves, right? Like it's something that's outside of norm, and we don't have. See, paranormal study is never gonna. You can't really have science live there. It might visit, right? So it's
Yeah,
like your paranormal lab would say there's a phenomenon that we're trying to move more towards an effect, like something that we can reproduce over and over and over again. And by the time you do that, it's the physics department that steps in, or the biology department that steps in,
Mm-hmm.
and it moves out of paranormal and into like quantifiable. But what we found was a kind of like a smattering of stuff out of a couple of universities, like big universities, and then it kind of dies. It kind of goes away. It was do you have a good memory of this, Dellery? No. I was gonna bring. I mean, you could speak to how about how many papers did you like? What was the major university you found it at? It was the one in North Carolina.
Is it Duke?
I think it was Duke.
I think it was Duke.
And
Oh,
so
Duke.
Duke kept records, and the University of Virginia does too, of these programs they had, and they just really don't have active programs anymore. So somewhere around like the 50s, 60s, somewhere in there, all the money just disappears. Like all the research just kind of like slows down. And Duke does continue to do some of these experiments, but they're not, again, they're not trying to move it into science too hard. They're just kind of going out and saying like, these are weird things that happen, and we're just going to document the cases, and then we're going to try to see if we can come up with some like tiny versions of a repeatable experiment and see what we can get out of it. And they were getting results, but they weren't going much further. So I saw the obvious stuff as like, well, you need to have a total discussion when you're speaking of magic and wild stuff like this. Like, I think we're talking about things that exist not in some unfound ether.
Mm-hmm.
Like they exist like completely within the spectrum of the electromagnetic frequencies that we have been measuring for 130 years. And that's where it lives, because that speed of light, it can go through everything. Like it's persistent. There's gonna be some speed limits on things in the universe, and like so it's electrons, it's photons, it's magnetism, it's like it's action at a distance. Everything we're doing right now is happening because we understand the electromagnetic spectrum. We understand how to control photons, and that's what stuff like this does. It takes in photons and does work with them. And
Do you
like,
think that we are not reinventing the wheel at the moment? Is that we are just discovering the things that we already knew?
I don't know. I mean, good question, but I don't know. I don't think I can answer it yet. Um, well, Paul, we've talked before. I believe it's pretty hard to get uh, this Moroccan skull that's
Mm-hmm.
300,000 years old that says Homo sapien was here, and
Mm-hmm.
then to go 300, well, basically 290,000 years before anybody's like, let's have a system of writing, like let's build a house out of stone. Like, I think it's pretty wild to think that there would be that much time,
Mm-hmm.
because what the story we're getting is like we went from hunter gatherers to this in 10,000 years. I'm like, I don't agree. Like, I just the part of my brain that thinks about stuff is like, I'm not okay with that thought.
The, the
Like,
the the reason why I'm asking you, Greg, is not of course I didn't expect an exact answer, but the thing is that I have somehow the feeling that we are drowning in information these days. We are drowning in information. On some levels it feels like a spam of information everywhere, and we are everything is living for 2 days and then it's disappearing because there is the next information coming up and the next one and the next one and the next one. And I think somehow in these times to want to go back to the book of Enoch, for example, makes it for me really interesting because it somehow gives me the feeling that even though the information that we have today is here and it's volatile, is going fast away, we're still missing something really big from the past.
it's fantastic. That's how, yeah, man, that's where my heart is too. That's, I'd never had thought about it like this, but it's essentially that even though everybody thinks we've got everything figured out, and I think that's the biggest thing we've run into, especially when we go do like talks, like live talks, is essentially like I'll drop into a live space sometimes and try to have talks with people that are discussing ancient history and stuff like this.
Hmm.
And I think it's the biggest thing of just like, you guys think we have it all figured out, and you're so wrong. Like, you couldn't be more wrong. Like, that and especially with our own story, like forget about the Big Bang and like why stars do stuff, and like that story is still getting figured out in a sense, like but it's like right in front of us. Our story, it doesn't make sense, and we will figure it out. There's no way this thing is lost to time. I don't buy that. I think a lot of it is lost. I think a lot of the surface level stuff is lost. But if we really treat it seriously in the sense that like we just need to go dig everything up, like we really need to dig up and see what these, and then when we dig it up, we can't be dismissive anymore. We've got to stop that. We
What
have to
what
stop that.
what of course we're going again in a small rabbit hole, but what concerns me is always in when we discuss about these ancient things is that on on some level we are really subjective, and I'm giving you the example that it's in my mind now, because I'm fully with you, and as I said, I have somehow the feeling that we are missing a lot from the past as well, and we are drowning now the information with information which is not relevant. I don't know who Kim Kardashian is. I keep hearing this name, but I have somehow the feeling that is more in the news than anything else. But um I was saying, yeah, there is a story most probably you're not aware of, but there is a story that somewhere in our mountains in Romania there were some giants that lived in the past, and I'm not. I don't have a problem with the assumption and with there are some proofs, but the problem which comes with this issue is that on this comes the extreme right from the politics side and said, you see, Romania is the center of the universe. Everything is spinning around Romania because those giants were living in our mountains. And this is something which makes this research really subjective, at least on every country level. And that's what always concerns me, because we are so willing to be not, or to be outside of the average. We want to be above average and want to be that nation that, at least this is my feeling from here, from a small country in Eastern Europe.
They want something to be like, look, yeah, where I grew up, it was the lake trout capital of the world, whatever that means. The small town I grew up in, lake trout capital of the world. Everybody wants something, right? Giant capital of Eastern Europe. Like they want this sign that they can stick up and be like, we'll put a little museum up. And I totally get what you're saying. I think we have, well, that's a general mindset thing. I feel like the story that people don't think about very much is that we can get weird and like divide out into teams on pretty much anything. And countries are like the big version of that, where we're divided out into national teams. And maybe we should think about more like the planet. Like the planet Earth is a team, and
we should try to figure out together before we figure out individual.
Yeah, and I think that the people, we run into this a lot. The modern folks that are inhabiting lands today, I don't care where you are, you didn't start there. That's
good
not
one.
where you started.
That's a
you
good
adapted to be there. And
exactly.
like, yeah, so it's really kind of irrelevant, like as to what it's more like you've got stuff there. You're really going to prevent people from researching it and looking into it. Or why even try to twist it? Like, what are you gaining? Like, you're going to have, if you found a site in Romania that like dated to 31,000 years ago, like, are we really saying those are Proto-Romanians, or are we? No, probably not.
It makes no
Probably
sense.
not. Probably a totally different group of people. Like, you're probably not going to find genetic material that looks like a modern Romanian, So I think that it would just be good to be like, we're humans and we're on Team Human, and thank goodness there isn't like the nation of like Ozbagel that is full of giants, and they're and they're just like camped in the modern day, like they're just camped out there, and because then we'd have a human v non-human, and that tends to see, it just seems like historically it doesn't always go well. But I don't know. I think you're right. There's something that like holds the information a little bit back. That's a kind of human nature thing.
Exactly.
We see it a lot, especially like in Egypt. It's nuts. It's nuts down there. Like you've got so many different. You have such a diversity of how the sites should be treated. and how the history should be treated. And then you have a diversity of people that like either they fully understand Egypt and they know not to get into things too deeply because it's damn mysterious, or they don't really understand it but they want to contribute to it, and they see like there's a lot of people trying to claim that the origin of Egypt. There's a lot of different cultures that are saying like that's us, like, and because it's us, we want all that stuff back, and like,
But
and we have
isn't
it.
it the same? Isn't it the same with Vatican as well, Greg? So
Oh
it's the
yeah,
same. It's the same discussion. Like they and the fact that it could be that is like I don't know if you know the movie The Book of Eli. But it could be that it's like in the Book of Eli, the book is nothing, but or what's inside the Vatican is nothing, but they keep it so in such a huge secret and makes no sense for me. Like, I mean,
they
what's
might
so
have
bad?
to. I always think about that, man. Think about that. They might have to keep that stuff secret because like what we can see on the public side from the you know photos of artifacts, you don't even have to visit the site, like from the translations of books, is that the history looks a lot more like a movie, like a sci-fi movie, than it looks like, you know, like just happenstance civilization coming together.
Yeah, but
Everybody that's out there with a story says like, you know, they're not like, and then this guy invented this. Like they're never just like, hey, yeah, like we do. Like there's no like Albert Einstein. They're not like, you know, ancient Albert Einstein invented the rules for the magic. No, it's always like a bird-headed deity that like carries around magical objects
yeah,
built that thing. You
but
know,
but but I mean, come on, man, make it official. I mean, yeah, of course, it's you make it a lot interesting, but what can go wrong? I mean, of course, you will get a big shock, and I think the same. Look what happened a few months ago when I think it's Department of Defense, which came out and said, of course, we had some communication with extraterrestrial civilization, and nobody, the
nobody
news
blinked
took
an
to
eye on this. Yeah.
nobody cared.
Well, they didn't. I didn't get a chance to see the data of that. I saw the statements, and I saw that they were. Yeah, that's a really interesting case, right? So this is like I tend to think we're at a time right now where you cannot put this genie back in the bottle. All you can do is slow it down.
For sure,
And when
absolutely.
you get close to certain things, I think that there's certain things that are right in front of us right now and floating around us right now that like if we knew about them, you could tap and tune into them with like low cost devices. Does that make sense? Like something that
Hmm.
if you knew about it. So I see this total like this line being drawn right at like the electromagnetic stuff, right at EM
Hmm.
stuff, to the point where like there's active research groups in this country like the Monroe Institute that say that's not where any of this stuff is happening publicly. They say that's not where ESPN stuff is happening. But I'm like, but no, where's what the fuck gives you the authority? Sorry, what's the that little F bomb? But it really gets to me, man. Like, what gives anybody the authority to tell people that's not where it is so consistently? And the only thing I can think is they're just trying to slow people down. They're just trying to slow them down just enough because all of it should be like right in front of us, if that makes sense. Like it shouldn't be some like hidden thing that you need some like Marvel, you know, comic book device to see, you know. So this team yeah, you're talking about quantum tunneling. They they looked at like the way that we're currently communicating is with this EM stuff, and EM stuff is kind of slow. Like if we're talking to the moon, there's a delay. Like there's a decent delay. And if you're talking to Mars, there's an even bigger delay. And if you're talking to the Voyager probe, there's an even bigger delay, like hours. Like that's how long it takes a photon to move. It can only move so fast. So they had thought, well, is that how aliens are going to communicate? Like, are they going to communicate with these, you know, photons? You know, just raw
Hmm.
photons. And the answer that they thought was no. So they developed this quantum tunneling device. And then I have the name of the guy. I have to dive on this research because it's kind of interesting, where essentially they create like a tube and the tube does better at speed, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
near instantaneous or something. So I guess the story is they turned it on and it was like immediately chattering.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's right out there, and like where that leads is, well, at least it's not completely hidden anymore, if that makes sense.
Exactly. It's kind of a
Yeah,
half acknowledgement.
yeah. But
Well,
that's the future. I think the future is really hard to predict. If we look at the past, I just think that story is just so concrete. It's so how much more do we want to see? You know, um, you'd asked if I had thought the ancient folks were kind of just like coming up with, like, they understood an effect, but they just kind of like dumbed it dumbed it down. Like a magical effect.
it,
They kind of had a way. I think what it is you had a central source of transmission, a truth that was known, like, way too long ago, like 13,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago, and it was just accepted, like widely truthful acceptance of the world they lived in. And then they lost that world, and they had to struggle to maintain what little technology that was still natural based in a sense, and maintain a way to transmit it across what is like the craziest void of human history ever. Like our first like 6,000 years post flood are pretty dark. They're pretty dark. Like there's not a whole lot jumping out. A few rock art things,
mhm.
settlement here or there. Um, but if you imagine, like, what would it be like for this civilization to end, and then give it 6,000 years of, like, nobody's putting books together anymore. Like, nobody, whatever, it's all gone and all the infrastructure is gone. It's just basically survival for thousands of years. I think it would make sense that as the stuff reemerges, it comes back out as like, the God gave us this idea to the sun has waves, and these waves can be captured by these things, and it turns more into like the sun is magic, and that's just all you need to know. And if you have this thing plus the sun, it does this thing. And if you look at plants, like all these plants that we look at that are, have these magical properties, like, we consider sometimes that, like, in a pre-flood world, the chance that that plants would have been the way you would generate chemicals is pretty high. That you wouldn't, like, go synthesize a chemical, you would genetically develop a plant to produce the chemical for you. And it might just be that some of these kind of made it. Like St. John's wort and, opium, and some of these things are like sort of like designer chemicals in a sense inside of a plant form. And they undomesticate and they redomesticate. You take any plant and you go out, like, you could take like a line of like Fiji apples, like really good apples, like these really expensive seeds, and give it, like, don't let man interfere with the orchard for like 2,000 years, and those seeds will start to devolve, man. Like, they'll start to go, selection's not taking place anymore. It's just like those seeds you will not have the same apple,
Correct.
and you lose evidence of domestication essentially.
Mhm.
So I think, like, with the diversity of plant life and the diversity of human understanding of like magical stuff, I think it just all lines up to say, like, we had it figured out, and then this thing happened, and we just remember little bits of it. But the little bits we remember seem to be like, I don't know, scientifically verifiable or quantifiable or something like that. It's not just all prayer requests or something.
How did you get from such a small niche in, like you said, metals and different materials to such a brighter domain?
Oh man, that's a good question. A lot of it boiled down to, like, I guess we were trying to figure out, like, how do you make a business out of this? It sounds silly, but it's like you want to keep doing something, but you don't really know how to. And trying to look at what we had, and I think we hit this point when we were doing plants and crystals and stuff like that, where it was like, well, we want to know more about, like, rituals, like, what were things that people are doing with these, and honestly, we want to know, like, could we go back further and find mention of these things and see it, like, could we find source material that's like several thousand years old, that's referencing some of this stuff, because again, my thought is the further away you get from, we'll say 10,000, 12,000 years ago, the worse the information gets. There might have been like one central preservation of a line, but we kind of, a book published last week is not going to have as much weight in my mind as something that was published like 3,000 years ago, just, on magical information. But it was kind of like we sought out older books to kind of source that stuff, and we thought, man, it'd be really good to just publish these. Like, we have to go through them anyways. We have to go through them. Like, we have to go line by line through the text, and it made sense to say, well, we're not just dealing with just magical stuff anymore. We're more just dealing with, like, what was the world like when it was magic? Because do you ever think about that part? Like, if you really buy into all the, Lord of the Rings wizardry stuff, like what would a world be like where someone could wield nature, where somebody could, electromagnetically induce control over another human being? What would the world look like if spellcraft worked, and if talismans and amulets worked? Like, not kind of worked, but like really worked. Like, if you could, like you could reproduce it. And I think the only way you find out the answers to that is by reading old books and trying to see, like, does anybody remember a time like that? Because that's where it'll end up. If we were in our research to figure out that, let's say there was a unique geometry and a unique, like, something you could do with geometry plus stones plus like crystals plus metals, that would make it so if you put an object on your head, that you could like get a cow to do what you wanted it to do. Right? Like, if there was some way to control a cow, like with your thoughts.
Okay.
Like, so if you did figure that, if you're
Makes
the first
sense.
person to figure that out, you're like three steps
sense.
away from being the king of the world. Like, it works on cows. Well, let's get it to work on humans. And then let's see where ethical boundaries are, and just mass control people. And
Correct.
it's not like we don't have mass control through photons. It's like that's images and videos and sounds. Like, we already do it. It's just the question's always been, can you do it without essentially right into someone's skull? And I'll tell you, the world we're in right now tells us, yeah, we're really, really close. Like I just read a paper that was like, um, using Wi-Fi to, um, uh, to read emotional state off of an individual, like invisibly. So using the Wi-Fi like in your phone to create a sensor net that you could like have this thing out, and it seems like they've got something figured out here. They got the signal to noise ratio figured out, and they're like, yeah, the Wi-Fi is like beeping out heart rate, it's beeping out respiratory rate, and with those things you can kind of infer emotional state, and that's like without putting anything on a person. So that means you have a testing apparatus in a sense, like, So I think we're getting to the point where we're going to figure out, like, humans are pretty manipulatable, and I guess that was kind of this is a long way to say it, but when you're dealing with like research up front, that's like, if any of this stuff is true, it gives you an advantage. Like, it's a type of tool or technique that gives you like an extreme advantage over another human being that doesn't like it doesn't know how magic stuff works. And if everyone's kind of poo-pooing the technology, then maybe we'll be the ones to kind of like nail it in. Does that make sense? Like, maybe we'll be the ones to like find it. And what happens if we do find it? Oh boy. Like, I don't know, because when we went and did the Book of Enoch, the story is, when stuff like this starts getting out broad, like, that's the end of the world. That's like when the world becomes like an untenable place that has to go backwards. And so I think we started to see it everywhere, like, it's hard to make sense out of that, but it's like we started to see.
I have to be honest that you managed to put magic and now connect it to what you just said in a different perspective for me, at least, because you are using magic as the as a name for something which cannot be explained. And I always thought until now magic is magic, but has no real explanation. And now it makes real a lot of sense. Like you say, okay, magic is actually something that you cannot explain now, or that you are not able to understand, even if I would explain you. And connected to what you just said at the moment, that if we put that out and we show, look, we can put this casket on our, or not this casket, this thing on our head, and we can control the cow. That would be magic for the masses, and that would be a close to the end of the world, like you said.
Yeah, it'd be a problem. It'd be a problem. Um, the like I said, that paper I saw was wild. That's MIT. MIT has been pushing the limits on human ethical stuff for a couple of years now. And I think they called that the EQ radio. If anybody wants to go look it up. But they had another project that was like just as wild and just as ethically WTF, which was they came up with methodology to slip dreams into people and do it like
To
pretty
sleep
reliably.
dreams, like to
Yeah,
create dreams.
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my
Like they could,
god,
yeah. And you're like, what in the world? So they have I don't know what's
that's
going on
scary
over there,
crap,
but I mean
man.
that's the important thing is that at least like now you know you can do it based on some graduate program person's project or whatever because it's speculative until somebody reproduces it and with those both of these things this is stuff you can go download. This is stuff you can go download the plans to get a dream slip printer, and it's not like it's not like the hardest thing to create. Like it's essentially they look at they get someone and they look at you look at it's a sensor set. I have these things in my in storage right now. I got to assemble a couple and see what we can do with them, but it's just this little it's like a thing that you get on the person's hand, and this is just to get telemetry. It's not part of the process. It's just to get telemetry, and you look for this exact moment um in the biofeedback. Like there's some exact moment you find, and it means that they're in a um it's not hypnagogic, it's the other one, state. It's a state right before dreaming, and
Mhm.
right there you can issue audio commands, audio narrative. Yeah, it can be
This is
very
so
light.
bad.
You don't even have to really hear
Decay.
it. Yeah, and it just drops in, and there's multiple ways to get sound on the people. There's multiple ways to get
But
you
it
know
kind of makes sense. I don't know if you know, there are a few ways of quitting smoking, and one of them is actually this sleep hypnosis, which is happening. You actually have a tape running. You have to play it, and it starts before you go to sleep. It has a long pause, and then it starts, like you said, most probably directly before entering into the REM sleep,
Mhm.
which makes sense because it gives you a kind of a
Yeah,
pre-hypnosis thing.
yeah. I mean that project sent me on a whole thing a couple of years ago I mean we went out bought the gear to make the kits to try this out because I think anything like this, anything where we can show that we're not as protected as we might think, and we're not as
Oh.
like we're pretty easy to hack. Humans are pretty easy to hack into. You don't even need fancy electromagnetic stuff to insert thoughts into people's heads. There's this whole I don't know, it's a little bit of witchcraft, I would say, modern day witchcraft. It's this the there's that whole field of NLP, which is neuro linguistic
Mhm.
programming. And there's folks out there that like you could go meet them and they could take the watch right off your hand, and you wouldn't even know it, and like you'd hand it to them, you'd hand them your watch and you wouldn't even realize what you did.
There is a
They
there is a there is a famous TED talk. I don't know if you know, from Apollo. Unfortunately, I don't have the family name. This is his name is, and it's actually it's called attention. I think the attention price of attention or something like this, and it's exactly this NLPs, like when through different ways they get your attention, and he's getting everything from you, and you don't even notice it.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff, and it makes me think like, well, geez, somebody can get that into like that's a whole bunch of techniques that people have to learn and get right and adapt quickly to what's going on. But I mean, like we have AI now. Like AI can help rapidly adapt things. Like AI can help with all this stuff, and there might even, like I said, there's probably other ways around it. There's probably just like some kind of core things that go on in human minds that make us like, I don't know, very easy to manipulate. I know if you strobe somebody with like green light, it'll shut the person off. If you
No.
have somebody that's talking and you repeat if you put like somewhere in headphones right now and it's blocking out most of the other sounds, and I'm hearing my own voice because we have, I don't know if you do that, but I do, like, I
I
hear
do
it in
the
my,
same.
yeah, because
I
it,
do
it
the same.
helps me know if I'm talking in the mic the right way or if I'm
Correct.
missing it.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. And if you delay that by like a tenth of a second, you'll shut somebody down. They won't be able to talk if you feed their voice back in. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's exactly 100% correct, and it's interesting. I had to Google it. I don't have my young Jamie. It's Apollo Robbins, and it's the world's most famous pickpocketer. I'm sorry for going back to that topic, but I want
So
to mention the complete name. Um, it's so interesting. Where we are going, and it's so interesting that I I had an idea while you were saying that you try to make a business out of it. And Greg, if you find a way to monetize a passion, we have to make an episode on that, because that's that's something that everyone is looking for sure. So that's if you manage to do that, chapeau. We have to talk about it.
okay. We're
But
trying
on
our
it,
best. we're doing everything we can. It's hard to pick the things because there's like you could end up investing way too much into something that doesn't get you any. So there's a lot of stuff we want to do, but we're trying to be like budget conscious, and it's very tough sometimes, like to find the edge. And I think our edge was publishing. It still is. It's kind of being presenters of the information rather than researchers who will publish a paper and just sit back. Does that make sense? And so we like to
yeah.
be in this space of like education, entertainment a little bit, but more on the education side rather than right now being inventors and trying to productize the space more. If that makes sense.
What's the part that makes more fun?
I mean, I was a product developer for like 20 years. I mean, I like making products, but I think
I
for
knew it.
fun,
I knew it.
I don't, I get a lot more fun out of research. Honestly, I like reading. I like to see stuff that's in these old books and be like, what the hell is going on here? I like that part, and I really like being able to just make that part of my day of just going and saying what book do I want to go read now and take notes on and potentially use in the future for a source of information. I mean, there's something about that like you can't beat it. Getting to like translate hieroglyphics and figure out like that end of things. I mean, there's never been a lot of money in this space, just so everyone's aware. There's never been like a mechanism to get money out really of this space in
It's
the past 100 and some years. It used to be you
but
could be a treasure hunter. You can't
but
do that
Greg,
anymore.
it's not about the amount of money. It's about the pleasure, and it's about the
Yeah,
enjoyment in, like you said, in seeing those things. And uh, I have to say that's a dream situation. And if you manage to make a living out of it, you'll never get rich from this, because it's always everyone is taking it with a pinch of salt, with a grain of salt, because everyone is suspicious when it's about this. And but I think it's important, if you manage to make a living, that's the most important, because you make a living out of something you enjoy the hell out of.
yeah. And let's hope that's not like ending up with manipulating people at a distance with electromagnetic devices, created on designs that we find in a cave 40,000 years ago. Like that's the dilemma there. I guess the biggest dilemma is like pursuing the product angle really hard, where the money would be a nightmare if you actually got something to work. Like I think I'd rather just like leave
Correct.
that stuff alone for a little bit longer, if that makes sense. Like,
Makes sense.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Let's switch to the Book of Enoch, because I think it's an interesting topic that we have to dig in, or at least I want to dig into.
Oh,
What surprised you the most? Because you made a let's say, more than a republication, at least from my perspective. And I want to ask you, what surprised you the most while working on the book?
Like the emo, the thing that blew my mind open.
Exactly. Yeah.
One single phrase that comes out where Enoch is he's talking to the big guy directly, essentially, like, and the big guy being like the highest deity in the land, the Lord, God. And there's a statement that just doesn't make sense, where uh, Enoch is told that there's this whole, so just the kind of like outside story is that like Enoch is it's been petitioned by the fallen angels to go speak with God. He's in some place that is not, maybe it's not home, but we don't really know where it is. And he's been kind of like educated on all this crazy stuff before he talks to God, essentially. And in this one little spot, he talks to God, and God goes, like, there's all this kind of like knowledge. You know, this place, the earth is screwed up, right? Enoch's like, yeah, I know that. So at that point, he goes, well, there's gonna be there's gonna be a way to fix this, but it will be 10,000 years until the guilt is consummated. Meaning, like, we've got basically immortal things involved here, and time to them is much different. But it's this literal number of 10,000 years that got me, because I just was like, how did that number out of all the numbers show up in a book that is 2,300 years old? And if you're 2,300 years old and you've got a 10,000 year window post flood, before like the quote unquote guilt is consummated, then to these people, 2,300 years ago, I mean, that puts that the year like 4,000 AD, 5,000 AD, before this guilt is supposed to be consummated, because their flood date was, like 5,500 BC, 4,500 BC. But the scientific flood date is like 12,000 years ago. Meaning, if you add the 10,000 years to 12,000 years ago, you nail the consummation of guilt being Christ on the cross, saying all of your sins are forgiven. What the whole flood is about sin. It's all about not human sin. It's about watchers, these angels, these fallen things transgressing against the plans of God. And God saying, you really screwed things up here, and there's only one way to unscrew it up, and that is to remove all the technology, to cut you guys down, and to bind you for 5,000 years. And that was the other one that jumped out at me. I'm like, 5,000 years? What is that? A binding for five? What does this even mean? And, the historical context lineup of a 5,000 year binding puts you like right into the neighborhood of the archaeological record, like where we don't see cities emerge and angel technology, whatever you want to call it, emerge like in force until about 5,000 BC, which is 5,000 years post 10,000 BC, which is the pretty much agreed upon flood date. So I just thought that being in that book was just like, whoa, holy crap, they shouldn't know any of this. Like they shouldn't, they especially shouldn't know. Christ hasn't even shown up yet. They should, it's not like they're revising something here.
That's, I have to say, that's really mind blowing, because that it's crazy. It's just,
Yeah,
it's just
it made me pay attention, man. When I read that part, it's like, oh, wait a second.
Absolutely makes sense. Absolutely makes sense. What do you think they are the forbidden teachings that the Watchers gave humanity?
There's a lot of them listed. So,
And why do you think writing is the most dangerous?
because it is, without a doubt. Without a doubt, man. If you if you had to orally transmit every set of instructions and every belief you had, your reach is pretty small. Your reach is as far as your voice can carry. And if you can write it down and somebody can understand it, that can last on forever. Your voice dies with your breath. Your writing is well, what'd you write it on? Like, did you pound it into tungsten? Because if you pounded it into tungsten, it's going to be sitting around for a while. Granite, sandstone, even. We were looking at some stuff from this week that's like it's in Saudi, and it's 9,000-year-old petroglyphs, and you're like, man, that lasted quite a long time just out in the elements. But it's written, so you can interpret it today. Writing is so dangerous. It is the way for things to spread. You do not get technology at the scale we have it without writing. You know, you can't get machinists even without writing. Like you can't even. You need instructions. You need things that can pass down, and you'll lose stuff so quickly if you don't have writing. So I think when a society develops that, so many things, so many advanced things show up with it. Propaganda shows up. The ability to record history, to have one perspective on history cemented in, that'll just last forever. It's huge. I mean, yeah, writing is the most worst thing that we could have developed if we wanted to stay like hippie flower child, you know, dancing in a
Do you think
garden.
it was a do you think it was a willingly mistake?
It was. What do you mean?
Was a mistake done on purpose? If it makes sense.
Like, do you so there's an angel associated with writing named Peneme. So are you suggesting like that Peneme did it on purpose versus
Mm-hmm.
like it was discovered and yeah, I think so, because I think the one thing you can gather from the Nephilim or the Watchers is that they're highly materialistic. Like they are very in control of the material physical world. And I think that writing gives them an ability to transmit their own philosophies and ideas and cement that materialistic world even more. So you need it. You need it at some point. I think you need writing, period. But yeah, I think it was quite deliberate. And in the description we get in the book of Enoch, it's not Peneme doesn't just teach about writing. There's some other things too. And um, one of the things that kind of jumps out is the kind of Peneme saying you've got to be able to take the good with the bad. And writing is exactly one of those things. It's a good with the bad kind of technology. You can do great things with writing, and you can also write Mein Kampf. Like there's the whole spectrum of things that you can do, right? Like there's you can inspire generations to love or to hate, and but you can't do that without writing. I think that's the point. Is that
Correct. Correct.
yeah.
I will move out of the main topic for a reason, and just say that don't you think that we are at the moment in a decay of reading? That
An
means a less
evolution
importance. Oh,
for sure.
an evolution.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
see it as an involution because I
I
have
don't.
somehow the feeling that okay, can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's always a little weird when things are being born. Like there's always going to be like some steps that are weird that take. We're in the infancy of something right now, and we are increasing our mental bandwidth, the amount of information we can get into somebody's head, and the amount of information we can extract from somebody's head a lot with what's going on right now. Like we are currently working out like how do you get, what's the fastest quickest way to get a fact into somebody's mind? Social media. You can do like 600 facts an hour, like it's wild. And on the other end of it, people just communicate what they communicate, but that'll get cleaned up too. There's going to be
Correct.
a lot. So we're in this infant stage. I think it's an evolution. I think that we are developing and will develop a lot of stuff in the next couple of years that when you look back on it, you'll probably say, well, that was this, look how bad we were handling this thing that we've got figured out now. And we've kind of got like the groundwork laid for it. And without this weird, I guess it's the Aquarius energy in the world of information everywhere, like we're not going to have the refinement process take place that, allows for this to
Hmm.
be like a beneficial thing in the long run. But I think, yeah, our information bandwidth is just going to go through the roof. And that's a good thing. it's also going to be a bad thing. This is the extension of that same group of technologies. Like you and I, as content people, we can go out and create like really advanced content right now with Google Veo or Midjourney or a million other
Correct.
things that bring the cost of the content way down. That the literal cost gets shifted onto a GPU somewhere and just eats electricity now. Versus, or we might have to go and get on a plane and go somewhere and take pictures or get a film crew together and do a bunch of really expensive stuff. So it
Even this thing that we are doing at the moment, it's easier than it was a few years ago.
so easy. Yeah, these things are so easy. The productization stuff shows up, and I think like it's inevitably changing things. I think there'll still be information authorities in the world, and I think that there's still going to be books in the world, and I think there's still going to be libraries and museums and whatever. But the digital experience, the digital interface, the information is just like it's gonna be wild, and it will be for a little bit. But I think it's going to lead to um, things where like we have hyper customized experiences for people on the digital side where like think of education where you could say like I want to be a doctor and some AI can like game that for you. They can hit you with a bunch of like a little entertaining, a little informational content throughout your formative years that will somehow load into you like all of the anatomy that you need to know and a bunch of cases that are interesting. And it's just doing this like it's just developing content personalized for smaller audiences in a sense. At the end of the day, there's always like niches, right? Like that there's an idea called the hyper individual, Freudian kind of idea, where individuals do exist. Yes, they're like everyone is an individual, but at some level there's like individuality, you and about a million other people, right? Like like think the same way, maybe more. And this can be evidenced like at malls when you go to a mall and they have a store like Hot Topic, which was like this punk store. It's like they knew the punks were out there and they knew they were shopping at the thrift store, but there was enough of them, this counterculture movement, where they could build a Hot Topic store which sells, like grungy, punky. I don't know what they sell nowadays, but like rave gear, who knows? Like, but they kind of tail into these counterculture things, and there's more than enough people there to support the store, and so you're not as individualistic as you might believe. And I think that these systems will develop ways to speak to those people, and for those people to also have a voice in the long run. In the short run, it is chaos. And there's no in this country, they're not regulating it for the next 10 years, I think.
Uh, but I think it's the same in yeah, Europe is trying to do something there, but I think the speed in which this technology is developing is bigger than the speed in which it can be regulated with. That's
And it's been
my
around
feeling
for a
at
while.
least.
Like it's essentially bringing the cost down on things that people have been able to do for a long time. Right. So
Yeah,
that's, I think, how they're seeing it. They're like, well, it's just speeding up
yeah. I think the
things
problem
that
is
were
that
already going on.
the problem is that I think the main incentive with which this company started first, they started to make money. They started with the reason of making money, and I think I'm reading at the moment. I don't know if you know the book Careless People, which was reading by this was written by this whistleblower of Facebook, and she said that at the beginning nobody realized the power that this social media can have, and they didn't want any regulation from any country because they would only wanted to make more and more money, more and more money. And that was the only reason. And I think now they realize as well, in parallel, the social impact that they have, the fact that they are able to um, influence anything, like
Yeah.
literally anything.
Yeah. And they have control over it, that's the dilemma, I think, for these platforms is that inevitably any rules you make will shape the digital society you have there, right? Like
For sure, for
anything.
sure.
If you say you can't say a specific word because it's hateful, guess what? It's going to shape the whole society there. And these platforms do have extensive rule sets um, as to what content they allow and what they'll, because they have to promote stuff because of the way they built these things. they all follow tail because they know that they get the highest metrics off of infinite feed-based content, which I thought was supposed to be illegal here, but they didn't do much about regulating it. But it's like they know that, so they basically need to throw content in front of somebody, change the TV for them in a sense, like give it to them.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so
Exactly.
there's a
But
whole bunch of science to
but
figure out, like how do we get the most effective
they
stuff in
move it.
front of
They
you,
moved it in.
you
In
know?
they moved it in the newspaper area where you have this limitless scrolling in the newspapers as well. Like you always get an. This is crazy. Like gives you such a lame feeling of never being up to date with everything.
Yeah, no kidding.
Uh,
That's how it feels.
I do it. Yeah, exactly. It's how it feels. You are never up to date, and that's why you try to push it down, and then because it's nothing interesting, but at the end you find something interesting.
Mm. Well, I think that the main thing is these guys had access to that bugs me. I just want to get this out there is that they regularly conduct psych experiments on folks on these platforms, like, and they disclose that they say, I read a thing from Meta that was like, we tried positive reinforcement and we tried negative reinforcement, and you're like, what does that mean? And like, well, on this side we tried to promote content that would make people feel good, and on this side we tried to promote content that was controversial, which is has the effect of raising blood pressure essentially. Like it has people get stressed talking on it, and they found that, like, there were benefits to both essentially, and the advertisers aren't going to complain either way. So they're at the end of the day they just want to buy people's attention.
And they have two things. You have people with power and people with power since long times, which make them some kind of dictators. Just my humble opinion here, but we see what's happening in Russia, so it's somehow the same thing. Like when you have Mark Zuckerberg running Meta since I don't know how many years, he's doing his own things, and it's not only him. Like maybe him is not his. We talk about Meta now, but it's the same with any other huge, big tech company. And the second thing, they are just pushed by personal incentives. So if I like, I don't know, let me give you an example, which is not so critical at the moment. If I like more Lakers than I don't know, a different basketball team, then I help push them up, and
And you
pushing the
can't
others
stop,
down.
and we can't stop you from doing that. That's
Exactly,
where folks are like
exactly,
not understanding. Like there's nobody that can, if one of these platforms decides to push XYZ person, that's their business. That's
exactly,
they're allowed to,
exactly,
unless they did something to harm shareholder value or like,
exactly.
right.
That's the only thing
Yeah,
that pushes
they're
them down.
totally allowed to
Exactly.
do that. They can there's a few folks like that well, I mean, they just make the methodologies on these platforms sort of like, if you want to grow really fast, you can buy that growth too, which is kind of gross. I think that's a little dangerous because you're like, you're supposed to be this like free democratic platform idea. The digital stuff is supposed to be like your dollars don't matter. And now it's like, yeah, but they kind of do, because if you'll notice, people with like really popular podcasts, they tend to look like they have a lot of money sitting around to do these podcasts. People that have shows that come out of nowhere. All the power to you, but like, it's not it. The platform is not being fair in the way that I think their mission was established, in a sense, to allow for those sort of things. Like that we're gonna get right. All we're gonna do is we're gonna get back into consolidated media again. Give it like 10 years. So at least on
I
the AI
played
stuff and stuff, like the flood of content is almost good to see, because maybe it goes away in 5 years, 10 years.
correct.
Yeah.
I played, and I have to go down on this. I played a few days ago with the um, boosting of posts on Instagram. You can invest up to 20,000 euros per day.
Oh, easy.
This
Easy.
is
I would be on product
insane.
teams and we would spend insanity dollars on these platforms. Like there's a company that just disclosed financials. They're doing like, I want to say it's 300 and some thousand a day in Facebook ads, and you're like, yeah, that's crazy. And to get numbers where you're like, why not go buy TV ads? And that's why that's cost is so expensive, because you have big companies coming in and investing on that, where it's like Coca-Cola will buy those ad slots too. and they're exhausting like $100 million annual ad budget. Like they're exhausting it. They've bought everything they can buy. They've bought all the magazine placements that make sense, billboards, like bus stops, like crazy television ads, movie placements. Like of course they're going to buy an Instagram and they're going to pop the price up for everybody else. Like the price per view is insane. I don't really know how people, unless you have a free product, or rather if you unless you have a product that costs you nothing, your cost of goods sold is zero, and then on the other end of it you're making like $500 a profit. I don't know how anybody really makes money on these places buying ads.
But this is how it's normally happening, Greg, because they are pushing it for 2-3 weeks. They are having a insanely low cost of production in Asia, and then they're selling for for a huge $500 a piece because they call it an extra quality from Germany. They just stick a label on it and say they are produced in Germany, and that's it.
They're boxed in Germany. They're labeled in Germany.
And exactly. I love the statement on the iPhone box is design assembled in China and designed in California.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. What can I say? Let's move back to Enoch. Much interesting topic. What do you think? Who do you think was Enoch, and why do you think his role is so significant?
Well, I think Enoch is a name at the end of the day, and it's more like a title or a descriptive name, and who he was based on his based on the what we have in there is he's a great great grandchild of Adam, the first man. So that he's like in this uninterrupted line, and I think he was a king. That's my opinion, but I think he was essentially like a king or a ruler. Um, and he lived in this pre-flood, period. Um, but I think what's really why it's so important is because it's not like he only shows up in this one book and goes away. Like he's in the traditional Bible. He's mentioned there. He's quoted, like Jude, I think. Like he's quoted. Um, Jesus knew about him. He's quoting him. Like he, but he's not just in that culture. There's a story out of Sumer where you have the same thing, this great whatever child of the first king, and his name is Emin and Duranki, or it could be Durana, but either way, it's a Sumerian compound name. It's a titulary name in a sense, like the words there mean the bridge between heaven and the sky. That's what the king's name meant. He was the bridge between between the earth and the sky, the heaven, which is exactly Enoch's story, and he's like in the same slot. And so I think he's a global figure in a sense. Like he's remembered in multiple cultures, and he was an interface between us and them. And I don't have a good like idea of what the them fully extends out to. Like
So you think it was not a person?
I think it was a person or a court, or like a court in the kind of in the sense of like a group of people, like a group of high-ranking officials. Um, yeah, I think he was a figurehead of something there, if that makes sense. Like he was the human delegation in a sense, because I feel like we the story we got from.
Sounds so political.
Well, I don't think it's political. I think it's more like
For
humans
sure.
were like the zoo animals in a sense and still are. And they're smart. We're smart. So we deserve representation and we have a purpose and a place. It's just if we're trying to measure power and the ability to control planets, we're way lower than whatever these other things are. And you have I mean it's like he's representing the human interests in these problems in a sense.
Okay. Um, you mentioned no. Would you mind explaining the shepherd's vision?
Oh, the vision of the shepherds. Yeah. Okay, I'll try. I don't have a book right in front of me, but I'm going to try. So Enoch's got some visions that he has, like he has dreams, and they're pretty colorful, and he writes them down. And one of these visions is of the future. Like that tends to be how prophecies work. They're of the future. There's no real limit on future, though, right? Like there's no, you can't say like he didn't put a date on these things and say, and at this point this will happen. So he has this really weird vision where he sees something like a shepherd so shepherds, like pasturing sheep, and he keeps seeing more and more shepherds. Like he's seeing like here's a shepherd, here's a shepherd, here's a shepherd, here's a shepherd, until he sees 35 of them. And this is like all in like one paragraph. So he's like really quick to get to this number of 35. And then he goes, and on the 36th shepherd, this flock is corrupted, and it's corrupted by kind of a symbolic group of birds like kites, I think a raven, but just a symbolic group of animals that are say like these animals showed up and somehow corrupted this flock of the shepherd's flock, led by an eagle. And it's a weird vision at the end of the day where you're like, okay, it made it in here. I don't, you see this stuff in scripture from time to time where it's essentially a dream that needs to be interpreted. And if you look at it from the outside, I guess the main points are 35, there's a shepherd, a leader, 35 leaders in a row, totally fine. 36th leader, definitely a problem. Corruption slips in, corrupted forever after, basically. In the translation that we were working with, the translator had thought this had to do with something called the Maccabean revolt, and other scholars had thought the same thing. And that was a set of events that took place near the penning of the book, near around 300, 200 BC, near the time this book shows up in ink, essentially. And I didn't know that, I guess. I guess is the best way to say it. It's like I was a little like, I'm just gonna go see something. And I for some reason I thought to myself, well, shepherds and sheep, this sounds really like Catholic dogma stuff, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like St. Peter's Basilica, you got this big sheep up on the wall. Like it's giant. Nobody sees it until you get perfectly lined up and say, stare that way. There's the eyes, there's the puffy stuff. We know that this is like a shepherd thing. This is a shepherd cult, in a sense, like going back for a while. So shepherds were seen as leaders, had been for a long time, shepherd kings even. And in the Catholic stuff, what you get is a whole crazy story. So I went and found a Pope list, and I was like, I want to know a little bit more about the Catholic stuff to see if there's a connection here, because I just had an idea. And we end up finding that there are 35 popes, from Pope 1 to Pope 35, that are all saints, meaning the church has like acknowledged 3 good deeds essentially and turned them into saints. Saints are like an interface with the Catholics. Like you can pray to a saint. Like you don't have to pray to Christ. You can pray to Saint, Teresa, like, and the 36th, not a saint. So the story of how the 36th Pope gets to not be a saint is bananas. And so the 36th guy, his name is Liberius, and he's a pope that was in place. I want to say it's like 270, 60 AD, and like he's there, and the Catholics are they're fine at this point. They're no longer like Christians are no longer being hunted down everywhere, and in fact, Constantinius II, I think, is the pope, or is the emperor that's in, and he is trying to change some things in the Catholic Church. Like he has a belief of there's like 2 ways to see the Trinity. Does the Trinity exist, or does it not exist? Is God really 3 things at once, or is Jesus just a separate thing? And it's like they're fighting over this. And this was enough of a fight to basically get Liberius to go into exile. And there's a bunch of other stuff they're trying to change too. Like, but he has to go into exile. He's like one of the first popes that has to just like take off and go into exile. And while he's in exile, there's all sorts of bad stuff happening. Like people are forging his letters, and he took a couple of people with him, and da 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 da. And he's being told like, I don't think you're gonna be able to come back. So we're gonna have to pick a new pope, and you're essentially an anti-pope. You're like the first anti-pope. Sorry. And yeah, all over some like political stuff, political ideologies and beliefs. And he I guess agrees to this. And unfortunately for him, he says, I would like, I'd like a say in who continues the church here. And he picked a guy named Ursinius. And he goes, I think this is who should be the next pope, like without a doubt. A lot of the cardinals agreed, like a lot of the voting people all agreed. There was someone else who was running though, named Damasus, and Ursinius and Damasus were kind of the two forerunners up until a few days before the voting takes place and all this stuff, the transitions take place, in which there was just like a slaughter of the Ursinius's supporters. Over 100 died, killed in the streets. The Roman prefects had to be called in. The emperor slammed his fist down and made sure that they took a vote. And then when they voted Damasus in. And so when they brought Damasus in, Damasus is the reason. Damasus is the reason we have the Catholic Church of today, without a doubt. So he's the 36th in this thing. And what he brought in was the Vulgate. That's the big one, the Bible, the standard Bible. And he allowed for like a bunch of these regional synods to kick up a bunch of authoritative rules and things that would change the way that the religion structured and worked and consolidated power. And what we see is like right as he's taking power, he's these regional synods were these councils. There's particularly one called Laodicea. Are doing things like that have never been done before, and you don't realize they've never been done before until you read this council's notes, and like out of Laodicea, they came up with like 60 canons, and some of them are kind of benign, but they're weird that they're in there. They're like, you can't take food from the weekly dinners. You can't take any leftovers home. And then there's another one like you can't dance at weddings. Like there's no more math. Like there's another one that's like you can't do any of this mathematical stuff. Don't do that. No more wearing amulets is another one. You can't have. I think there's one that says like you can't share bread with a Jew, which is weird. Hold on to. What is it?
You are forbidden from feasting with heathen persons.
So it's just weird stuff like this. And then it's also like, oh yeah, by the way, Canon 59, here are all the books that you're allowed to read at church. And if it's not on this list, you can't read it. So it creates the problem where people think that all books are banned from the Bible. They're not banned, they're simply not on the list. And that all starts right there. So his shepherd vision is sort of this. It's seeing that there's gonna be, because we have to tie in that there's dead on the money Jesus Christ energy all over that book of Enoch. Like he doesn't say Jesus, he doesn't say Christ, he says the elect one, he says the Lord of Spirits. It's all there, for anybody willing to put it together. This is heavily influential in the folks that saw Christ of Nazareth show up. It's wild. Like they would have read this and been like, this is the guy. But then to think that 30, like that he's saying, once this all gets set up, man, in 35, you're going to have 35 good leaders, and then the 36th is going to be a big problem. And to have it line up historically so tightly is wild. And it's almost like without Damasus, if that had never had happened, you don't know if the religion of the Christianity, forget Catholicism, if Christianity would have become what it is today. But I can tell you, without that, I can see a lot of the bigotry eroding, and a lot of, because it's just crazy rules that only show up, over here, and people don't know that there's really no scriptural basis for any of these rules. We're just going to say stuff and make up rules because it's how we want our club to run. This is where you get the whole concept of like women can't take the altar, and you're like, well, this wasn't the case before this. That's why they're making a rule. That's why they have to make the rule. They're not trying to they're preventing what's happening naturally. Is why you make rules. Like I have kids, and I don't just like come up with rules for them. I wait until somebody spills ice cream on the couch, and I'm like, no more food on the couch, guys. Like that's the end of food on the couch. Like you got to have it at the table. I don't just go out there and say stuff without it being a thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was exactly what Enoch saw. It was the eagle coming in and leading a bunch of factions, because the eagle is so tightly associated with the Romans. Like even when the 2300 years ago, the eagle in Rome is pretty much there. And the Roman influence on this whole situation is like off the charts. It's off the charts.
Man, I have less words left. I'm the 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 problem is always like when you read it at first, when you told the story, I thought, okay, it's like the vision, like the vision which is there, but that it makes sense so exactly that everything is matchable. And were you the first one who did this research?
I don't know. I tend to be like, I try to not go out looking too hard, because if I find something tangential that's close to it and off the mark, I don't want to go out and correct somebody's research, if that makes sense. Um, it's entirely possible. I think we might be the first group going out and talking about the 10,000 year thing, the 5,000 year thing, and the shepherd thing. I think we might be, but I'm not entirely sure, man.
But because this is such an great discovery from my point of view, um, and it should be more popular, Greg. I, I I don't know how to say it in a
It's the
different way.
God's ears. I mean, potentially, like I think there's always ways to look at anything that's this old and try to interpret it. So I think that's maybe where I think it's anyone you talk to, as long as they're not regurgitating like somebody else's opinion on it, everyone's going to have a different interpretation of these things. And so we just get to present this interpretation. And if it were completely true, which I tend to think that, especially the shepherd vision, is just like blow your pants off true. It's like, what do you even do with that other than saying, like, hey, Catholic folks, just so you know, like your church has got corrupted, like right around there. Go search, go look. This is, Council of Rome territory. This is like Council Laodicia. Like these are things that you can look at that and think that maybe a bad force did that.
What if that's what's written in those hidden files in Vatican, which they don't want to publish?
I mean, possibly. I think it's not just that. It's more. I think it's they have more clear knowledge of the doctrines, and I think they have a more
For sure.
clear knowledge of like why we have a flesh body and why our consciousness seems to persist in and out of the flesh body, like as a feature. With people that can do like astral projection, people that have near death
Hmm.
experiences. Like it's. I think they have a lot of clarity on things like that sets them up to not want to share it too much, because it it's exclusively important to them and nobody else, I guess. They're controllers, right? Like at the end of the day.
At the end, that's what's important. Information is power. And I think it's clear that what you are trying to do here is to try to get whatever is your understanding of those and whatever it makes sense from your point of view to put it out there for everyone to have it available. And I think that's something which is so important in today's world, like to understand that we are not discovering the wheel again, to understand that we have seen stuff that existed in the past. We have to have this open mindedness to accept the things which sounds a bit different than what we are used to.
We
Have to, exactly.
Because I think if we work at this hard enough, we're gonna find the big answers. And I guess like a lot of working with the Book of Enoch was like, can we believe this or not?
Mm-hmm.
Does that? Yeah, it makes
Makes sense.
Yeah, and
Makes
it's like,
sense.
well, if these parts are kind of checking out, then what about all this other stuff? Like, is it all going to be true? See, I personally don't like have a belief that everything written in a book is going to be true. Like, I think that it's going to be a mixture of things, unless you can talk to the author. And these older books, I think they're mixtures of parables, like parallel stories, and things to get points across. And then there's going to be like some really hard stuff, hard data in there. And that, I think if we have the mentality more that it's valid to kind of like try to piece history together through these things, and use that as a scaffold to go looking for things, then that I think that's what we're supposed to do. I think that's how we're supposed to see these things. It's like this famous story with
Correct.
Troy being like a mythical city forever, forever, up until like the 1970s or 80s or something when we dug it. Like, until we found it, we didn't know like everybody just thought it was just a myth, and it's kind of the story with Atlantis and stuff like this. Like people think it's a myth, and it's like, well, if it's not though, that would be a pretty big thing to go find, huh? Like that seems like they had some technologies that we don't have. Like,
That's always the point that we have to admit. We have to admit that we don't know anything.
yeah,
We don't know everything. Sorry. And at the
yeah,
end, we don't know anything. We don't know much. We know only the things that we know, and that's everything that it's outside of that closed circuit. It sounds crazy at the beginning, and everything that we have today as given, it sounded crazy at the beginning. Everything, and that's why we have to have the open mind to discuss about these things. Greg, we have to call this an episode again, and we have to do another one.
oh, you got me. You
I
got
got
me
you.
real beans for another
I
one.
got
Okay,
you.
okay. Twist my arm.
Thank you for the third one, man. Man, is an insane pleasure that I have to have these conversations with you, and I cannot get enough of them. I'm it's purely honesty now.
So I really enjoy talking with you, Paul, too. So we will get on. Was this gonna be a fourth one? Okay, we'll get a fourth one set up. You're twisting my arm.
Absolutely. I'm sorry for that I have to do this, and I hope the police will not get me for that. Greg, guys, thanks so much. See you at the next one.
All right, thanks, man.
Have a nice one. Bye.